Welcome. My name is Antigone Lefteris Ladd, and I grew up in Westminster, Maryland, as did our speaker today, Melvin Hurwitz. Personally, I have a passion for World War II history because of my own family's involvement in the war. Both my father and his brother, and both of my mother's brothers, all served in the military, from the jungles of New Guinea to India to the beaches of Normandy. Their stories, however, are not unusual, as you will learn today. Melvin Hurwitz is going to share his own war experiences in the Air Corps, but he has chosen not to focus on himself, but on his family's history, sharing stories of all four Hurwitz brothers in World War II. Their story is colorful, as the four brothers served in four different branches of the military, and they served in various locations around the world. And we're going to learn about how stressful such a commitment of service was for the families back home. So let's begin this story of a Westminster family by learning how his parents, both of them Russian immigrants, came to Westminster, Maryland, then started a successful business and raised a family that would become totally involved in World War II. So Melvin, let me ask you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind sharing your age, and set the stage for what is an interesting collection of stories. And you have been very generous in sharing your photo albums and the stories of you and your four brothers and your family. So let me ask you to take over from here.
Thank you, Antigua. I'm 96 years old, born in 1925. I've had a wonderful upbringing in Carroll County in Westminster. I want to thank you and the Carroll County Historical Society for doing this for me. Parents, of course, were born in Russia. They were from Belarus, Minsk, and a city called Vitebsk. And they came to this country not knowing each other. They met in America. They both landed in Baltimore, and that's where they got married and settled. My father, as a child, learned clockmaking and in Russia. When he got to America, that eventually led to watchmaking and eventually a jewelry store, and what evolved to be the Colonial Jewelry Company. It was celebrating its 101st year this year in business. But it all started for me in Carroll County. I had a wonderful upbringing there. We all went to Westminster High School, had wonderful teachers, and everyone seemed to get along. The big band era and pre-war, and everybody was having a good time. We did not realize what was going on overseas, what was happening, but eventually we were all brought into the fray.
Outstanding. Well, let's look at some pictures. If you give me just a second, I will turn on the screen, pull up the show. All right, Melvin, can you tell us what we're looking at in this picture?
This is a picture, of course, in our uniforms after the war. We got out at different times, but our parents insisted we have a picture taken together. For some reason, we didn't want to do it, but they insisted, so we got our uniforms out, we got redressed, and had this picture taken probably in late 1946 or mid 46. The boy on the left sitting down is my youngest brother, Jerry. Above him is William, the naval officer. Standing is my brother, Albert, the Marine, and I'm on your right-hand side, the Air Corps. Of course, my mother and father, Ray and Benjamin.
They look very proud. Well, thank you for saving that picture. That is worth gold today. Let's look now at your parents. Tell us about them.
My father, born in Russia, he learned clockmaking. Always a member of the family that was living in America would be the one to bring over somebody. He was the only one of his family to come to the United States. All his brothers and sisters all remained in Russia. Through the years, we've gone to Russia and met them, but he was the only one of his family to come here.
When did he come over?
He came over, we're not sure the year, but I presume around 1910.
Okay. And here is your mother.
Mother Ray, who considered the prettiest of all the girls. She's one of 4 or 5 girls, 2 brothers, a big family. They landed in Baltimore, and he met her, and that's all she wrote.
Obviously, they were happy. And here is what, their first store?
And this is a Columbia jewelry store in Westminster. My father had a store in Baltimore, but he was recruited to open up a store in Westminster by a wholesale jeweler. He went into partnership with the jeweler, and they opened the Columbia Jewelry Company at 34 West Main Street. But as the war came along, he did not want to be partners anymore. So family got together and pitched in and got money together and helped my father out. He bought out the company, and he changed it to Colonial Jewelry because it sounded very much like Columbia. And he bought the store next door, which was a beauty parlor, and made it to what become the permanent Colonial Jewelry Company at 32 West Main Street.
I have to tell you a story personally. I remember standing on my toes and looking in the window for many, many years. I love that store. So what was it like growing up in Westminster?
Well, we had a good time. I loved Westminster. Albert was the leader of our family, the boys, and we were a little bit of a rascal crowd. And he used to string a clothing line from one end of the living room to the other and put a blanket on top as a curtain. And he would have put on one-act plays for us. And he's from one side of the curtain to the other. And he'd be a villain one time and a woman the next. And we'd always beg him to give us a one-act play, Albert, give us another one-act play. So we had a lot of fun together.
Well, you're fairly close. There's what, 6 years between you?
Yes.
Well, not even, because he was born the end of 20, so more like 5 years.
About more like 5 years between the 4 boys.
Yep. This is a great picture.
This is just a picture we put in. My brother Will, at the age of 5, my brother Albert had written a very moving little thought.
We'll say, Willie stands stiffly before us, a shy smile lighting his face. He's only 5 and he hasn't seen very much of life. As you study the photograph, you want to break through the barriers of time, pick him up and set him on your lap and tell him about the great things that life has in store. The years of love and affection that will belong to his and to those of us who are blessed simply by knowing him. Brother Al.
Not a beautiful. Yeah.
What a tribute.
Yeah.
So you brothers were very close then, I take it.
Mm-hmm.
So what are we looking at here?
We're looking at another picture of us growing up in Westminster, a little older. This was taken on Bond Street. My father used to build houses, and let's always have a little farm or two to fix up. And it was his hobby. And he built this house on Bond Street Extended. And this is in front of the house.
Now, did you boys take turns working at the store?
No.
Okay.
None of us.
Did you pick up anything just by being around your father?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yes. I mean, I'm from but I put my nose like you did across the counter, looking up and see the little diamonds sparkling in the papers. He had a good feel for what was going on, but we didn't have any great ambitions. So
interesting.
It up as you went along.
Nobody learned watchmaking from him?
Nobody.
Isn't that interesting? And that's where he started.
He didn't even continue on with it afterwards.
Okay. Well, you obviously all went to school there. So walk us through who graduated first, second, and third.
Well, Albert, of course, on the top, he went to Maryland Institute first, so part-time, but he graduated in 1938, went to Peabody College. Will graduated in 41, also Peabody College. I graduated in the class of 42 in Peabody College. All went down there.
Wow.
no place else to go. We all worked our way through. I worked in the cafeteria, Albert and Willie too, and helped pay our way. We hitchhiked back and forth between Nashville and Westminster. That was done all the time in those days. Many stories along the road that I remember, hitchhiking back and forth.
How did Albert happen to pick Peabody College in Nashville? I mean, I never even heard of it until we started with this project.
Peabody's considered one of the finest teachers' colleges in the country.
Oh,
Now part of Vanderbilt University, right across the street.
okay.
Albert graduated from Maryland Institute of Art, and one of his friends, girl who graduated with him, he said, "What are you going to do now?" She says, "I'm going to Peabody College in Nashville, Tennessee." He says, "Do you mind if I drive along with you?" His parents were driving her down. She said, "Sure, come along." So he went down to Nashville with this girl and her parents, and he stayed. He loved it. Beautiful campus, sort of like Duke University.
Interesting. So he went first and you all followed.
Well, he went first, we all followed. We didn't know what to do. We weren't old enough to go in the Army yet, so we just went down there.
I love it. Okay, let's look at each one of you from your high school yearbooks. I think this is a fun comparison. So
Yeah.
Albert has the nickname of Ben. How did he get that?
My father was Benjamin. They did that. They called you after your father, whoever.
So he was into
Ben.
art, music, and
Everything.
everything.
He was had a high school quartet with 3 other fellas, and they sang at all the country churches and around. They all had good voices, and Albert was very close with his buddies all through the years. Whenever he had a reunion or something, they would follow him, or he would come to Westminster. They go to Balgers, and he never gave up his friends.
Now, I have to ask you, how did he manage to go to Westminster High School and the Maryland Institute of Art? I mean, he probably
went
didn't
to
have
Maryland Institute every weekend, and he would hitchhike or get rides, find people that were going into Baltimore. Sometimes he would just be left off in the suburbs. He would take a streetcar and go down to Mount Laurel Avenue, where the Maryland Institute was. But he persisted, and he was a wonderful artist for a kid. And I remember as when he was 15 years old, he'd go down to Ocean City and sit on the boardwalk for 25 cents. He would sketch your picture. He was that talented. And so he continued with Maryland to get his degree.
That's a lot of initiative for somebody at his young age.
Yes, it is.
Okay, let's look at Willie's high school yearbook. Tell us about him.
Willie was a good student. He was quiet, thoughtful boy. As you can see, he was class valedictorian. He won the Rotary Award, which was considered the premier award in high schools. Everybody always wondered who was going to win the Rotary Award. Well, Will won it in his year. He loved to sing. He was in dramatics. We learned our love for the Gilbert and Sullivan from our high school productions, Pinafore and the Pirates of Penzance, etc. And it's carried it through our life. My daughter, everyone in the family, some good thoughts for Gilbert and Sullivan, Mr. Eaton and Mr. Lou Ross Hawkins, the music teacher, and they were wonderful.
Fantastic. Okay, let's look at you, Melvin, in high school. You got the same nickname. You were Benny.
I was Benny, Albert was Ben.
Were you vivacious, suave, and zestful?
I might have been vivacious and zestful, but I don't think I was ever suave. My mother called me everybody's mixing bowl because I was always in everything. So
What's
I was not
fascinating is
so-
you're into music as well. All of you were into music, band,
Oh, no,
operetta.
to this day, I love music. I was in campaign leader. We won that year. Had a great time in Westminster High School. I started out in elementary school on Graceland on Green Street. And then we moved over to Center Street, where the Westminster end ended up being. And then I was one of the first classes to move over onto Longville Avenue to the new high school. And our class was the first class to have a senior prom in the gym in the new Westminster High School.
great history there. And then look at Jerry. He did not graduate from Westminster High
No,
School.
Gary moved around. He was too bright. He was a problem student because his thoughts were somewhere else. So Daddy finally sent him to the Park School in Baltimore, which was a private school, which I think was for students who excelled in academics and probably had problems in other schools. And he excelled at the Park School.
Interesting. Well, let's see what his yearbook says. It says, once upon a time, there was a lonesome 7th grade class. And if you jump down, it says, now at last we found our missing virtue. Its name is Jerry Hurwitz. This gentleman has endeared himself to our group by his extraordinary faculties. For years, our history class has accepted Gone with the Wind as its Confederate Bible. This year, however, he shattered our illusions by not only insisting, but by proving that the Civil War was not fought on Scarlett O'Hara's back porch. At this time, this astonishing new edition came forth with a calm statement that he was going to give up his all-consuming histrionic fire to delve into the intricacies of the Russian ballet. Holy cow. So it sounds like Jerry was a little into everything. And in addition, he hoards athletic fervor, knowledge of Hamlet's home life, supply of references, and a genuine interest in music for the multitudes. Sounds like he had dipped his hand into a little of everything.
Jerry's a bright man. He would talk to me for hours and I didn't understand one word he said.
That's great.
With Kant and Schopenhauer and all the philosophers, great philosophers in the world.
Well, the war begins just as Albert is finishing up college. The rest of you are in high school, but as the war goes on, each of you finishes high school and then takes off. So walk us through their military service. How did Albert get into the war?
Albert always wanted to be a Marine, nothing else, just a Marine. He volunteered for officer candidate school, but he did not make the grade for some reason. So he re-enlisted as a private and became a combat artist in the 1st Marine Division.
Let me show you something here. For those who are watching this show, you should know that most of the World War I, II, and Korean War military records have been lost. They were burned up in a fire in St. Louis, where the National Archives had them stored. So about all we have for most veterans of World Wars I, II, and Korea are their draft cards. So this is a military draft registration card. This is not enlistment. It's that any young man 18 and up to about maybe 45 had to fill out a card to be put on notice that the government would know where to reach them. So Albert, at age 21, filled out this card. He lists his name. You'd see there's no middle name. His street address in Westminster, but he's a college student in Peabody College. His father is listed as his reference. And the back of the card shows your height, weight, and coloring. So Albert is 5'6", 147, blue eyes, blonde hair, and light complexion. And for other physical characteristics, he has a scar in his left eyebrow, which we can only guess at how he got it. But being one of 4 boys, I would guess that was quite common. So you will see we have collected the draft cards for all 4 brothers, so you can see how they look.
Yeah.
Now, back to you, Mel.
Of course, this picture is of Albert. Albert was a combat artist. He flew around in his little Spearman Cub planes and sketched landing areas on the different islands that they're supposed to land upon, and they come back with other artists and so forth, and you see them there sketching landing areas, and some tables had sand on them, and they would pull up the sand and go out where they were going to land, and this was how they did it. Albert did this for all of the major campaigns in the Southeast: Okinawa, Guadalcanal, Peleliu, bloody campaigns, tough campaigns, and many Marines were killed. After the war, he was in Tianjin, China, in the occupation force.
Wow, he did not have an easy service career.
Went
Here
all
he
through
is. Here he is sporting a goatee. He says, "I feel a lot better than I look." That's great. Oh, and here he is in front of a palm tree. Must have been really hot because I see a lot of photographs with no shirts on.
South Sea Islands.
So he went in early in the war and stayed all the way through till the end?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wow. Now tell us about Willie's military career.
Well, he enlisted in the Navy after Peabody, the year of Peabody, and he went to boot camp training in Chicago, Illinois, and then he sent him to Carson Newman College in Jefferson City, where they had a 30-day program for people that had gone to college. And in 30 days, you became a lieutenant junior grade, became an officer. So they were laughingly called the 30-day wonders, because in 30 days you get commissioned. But Willie always laughed and said they called us 30-day blunders. So that was part of the humor. But he became an ensign first class, and he sent on a cargo ship.
You go pull up a picture of it. There it is.
Someday, USS Trigo. And that furnished supplies all over the Southeast to the islands.
Let me go back and pull up his draft registration card.
Okay.
So here we have William with no middle name, Hurwitz, Westminster, same address, student at Peabody College, your father as his reference. And he is 5'6" and a half, 145 pounds, blue eyes, blonde hair, and light complexion. So very similar to Albert in height and weight and coloring.
Now, this is a story of World War II. Will had an idea that Al was in a particular island, and the ship came into that island. So Will went aboard on land, and he made friends with this young man you see kneeling there, who happened to have a Jeep. And he told him the story, he's looking for his brother. And they went around from camp to camp, and he wasn't there. And one fellow says, well, he was here, but then he moved there, and so forth. Finally, he got to one camp, and one guy yells out, hey, Hurwitz, your brother's looking for you. So your brother's here. So that was it. So,
well, let me show you what Al wrote up many years later. He wrote up this about their meeting in Okinawa, exactly what you were saying. I had no idea of Willie's whereabouts in the South Pacific, but he was aware that I was in Okinawa. And when his ship docked, he began the long process of tracking me down. A Jeep driver was so moved by Willie's efforts, he volunteered to serve as his private chauffeur, schlepping him around whatever hills, gullies, and mud holes finally led to my location. He goes on to say, when Willie invited him to join him aboard the ship, Albert thought he was crazy, but his commanding officer seemed to think it was a good idea. So they headed out toward Willie's ship, and then he says, it was astounding to me to see Willie in charge, with men jumping to his command. Willie was held in high regard and affection by his fellow officers and by the enlisted men who served under him. And I think this is the most touching part. He says, everyone was sincerely moved by the idea of two brothers enjoying an accidental reunion in the vastness of the Pacific theater of war. Wow.
good story, isn't it?
And it's very touching because it shows how much they cared for one another.
Yes.
You know, to go looking through the Pacific Islands, for heaven's sakes. That's amazing. Great story. Now, Mr. Melvin, here you are with a drink in your hand.
Why not?
How did you get to the Air Corps?
Well, as we said, I went down to Peabody after graduating from high school, and I was 18 years old, and I knew I was going to go in. Someone says, well, why don't you choose where you want to go? He said, why don't you go in the Air Corps? We got a hospital, you've got food, you've got a bed, and you're wearing silver wings, and the girls love the silver wings, so that sold me, and I went down to the Air Corps recruiting office in Nashville, and I joined. I went back to Maryland a few months later, and in summer of 43, I was inducted into the Air Corps at Fort Holabird, Maryland.
Interesting. So where did you train?
I trained all over the country. I went to Wofford College for college training detachment. I went to National Army Air Center for aptitude, and I turned out to be an ace in the Morse code. The instructor asked, how come you're so better than everybody else? I said, well, I was a drummer in the Boy Scouts and the college band, and the rat-a-tat-tat didn't sound any different than that did it the dot dot from the Morse code. So I became a radio operator, and I went to gunnery school. I went to St. Louis and Scottsfield, gunnery school in Yuma, Arizona, and became a radio gunner.
Great story. Thank you. Let's see. Your draft registration card. You are now living at Bond Street Extended, is where your family was when you were 18. Your father is your reference. You are a student at Peabody College. Again, this is before you enlisted.
Right.
You're 5'6", 145.
Just
blue,
like the rest of them.
Blue eyes, blonde hair, and light complexion. Now, there's a story here. Tell me about the crew that you're with.
Well, after I became a radio gunner, we went to MacDill Field where they made up crews, and we met all these men. We had never seen them before. We were destined to become intertwined with them. The fellows kneeling down are the officers, as the co-pilot from left, right, co-pilot, bombardier, pilot, and navigator. And we're the enlisted men. I'm the radio operator, the engineer, the ball turret gunner, the rear gunner, and another engineer, so waist gunner. So that was our crew.
Did you stay together with the whole crew throughout the war?
We stayed together. Our pilot left us midway, but he went into navigation reconnaissance or something, but otherwise we all stayed together. The pilot's the only one I kept in touch with after the war. He was my friend. Another story.
Well, now here's your position.
Yes, I was right there where the arrow is. That's where I stood at time of combat. I never did have to fire it. I never saw any Luftwaffe. Right behind the arrow is a bench where I sat at a table, a radio operator. On the other side, and the waist gunner stood on the other side of the plane. There's two windows there, one on each side open.
Well, I bet it could be a little crowded if there are two of you there back to back.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Now, here's another story of you getting together with your brother Albert. Obviously, you guys really worked to see one another, even though you were in different services.
Sure, we were close. Well, I was stationed in Nashville, Tennessee, probably at the Army Air Center, and Al was at the Camp Lejeune, and we decided to meet in Charlotte, North Carolina. So we came to Charlotte, and here we are sitting on top of a Army vehicle of some sort. Pretty good, isn't it?
Absolutely. So you both had enough time to make the trip over, see each other, and then head back to base.
We had a weekend, you know.
Beautiful. Great. I'm so glad you took a picture.
Yeah.
Now, tell us about your service. What kinds of flights did you do?
Well, I flew over Germany, I flew over Czechoslovakia and France. Repatriation missions were interesting. flew into Linz, Austria, picked up emaciated, sickly French prisoners of war that had been captives of the Germans for I don't know how long. We stripped them of all their clothes, whatever that they had covering them, and was deloused them with the delousing powder. We wrapped them in a blanket, and we put them on the plane on each side of the fuselage, and we drove them back to Chantilly, France. And we did that twice, back and forth from Linz. And I was so disappointed. The Danube was not blue. It was a bloody mess. But of course, that was wartime. So I'm sure they cleaned it up by now.
Well, tell me about Chowhound. What is Operation Chowhound?
That's a famous operation. Well, General Eisenhower and the Allies knew that General Dale Smith knew that the Dutch was starving. There was a lot of behind the scenes negotiations going on with a certain aspect of the German government, knowing the war was almost over, that they made arrangements for a truce that we could fly in and nobody would shoot at us. So that's what happened. We flew in, we loaded the Bombays up with food, and we flew in as low as 300 feet.
Wow.
Right down in there, and would drop this food into stadiums, into marked fields, at big X's for where to drop the food, and people were cheering and so forth. Big sign in the field, "Thank you, Yanks," made out of flowers, that tulips and so forth. That
Oh, wow.
way of thanking us for what we were doing. Audrey Hepburn was down there somewhere. She was suffering from malnutrition, from food through her life, even though the wonderful life she led. She always suffered from the maladies that she had from starvation when she was in World War II.
Wow. Tell me what the pictures are there. What's the one at the bottom?
The one at the bottom is a Christmas card made out of a photograph of our air base, Stebbage, England, where we flew out of. You can see the Quonset hut there, and they're all lined up, and the runway and so forth. Every other farm in England had a air base. There were about 30 or 40 of them all over East Anglia, flying out over Europe. The one on top, picture on top, is a painting of a control tower and a B-17 coming in, is what it looked like.
Beautiful. Now tell us about Jerry's World War II service. He was just getting out of high school and the war was starting to wind down.
Right, and Jerry didn't serve a long time, but he served in an artillery unit in Fort Bragg, North Carolina. I really don't know too much about his service. He never talked about it much.
But what's interesting is by the time he graduated high school, the war is starting to turn in our favor, and there isn't going to be but
he was
a year
at
to
the
go.
very end. We were at the end, but he was at the very end.
Right. Very different circumstances.
Right.
Now, here is his draft registration card, which he filled out when he was 18, listing your father again as his reference. He's only 130 pounds. Holy cow. And he wears
5'7",
glasses.
A little taller and a little thinner. He's a slight boy. And he wears glasses. He was the only one who wore glasses.
There you go. Now, this is a very touching picture because it tells the story of your mother and her reaction to having all her sons in the military. Can you share that story for us?
Yes. I was stationed in gunnery school in Yuma, Arizona. One day, I got notice to come to the orderly room. They told me that they got word from the Red Cross that my mother was having problems with a breakdown or whatever. They thought it was urgent for me to come home because all of her boys were gone and she found it difficult. So they gave me a week's leave and I came home, stayed with the family, and she seemed to get better and she seemed to understand. And I went back and everything was all right from then on. But it was a moving time. Somebody asked me once, how did your parents feel when you left for the war? And I said, well, I was one of two that left before me, and I guess they were getting used to it. But in reality, as I look back on it, I was just young and full of excitement, and I didn't have the maturity enough to realize what or think about what my parents were thinking about when I was leaving.
I think that's probably very true. Well, God bless you all. You all four survived the war, even from your different locations, different career paths. Follow us now to what happened to your brothers when you came back home and what kind of career directions you chose. You want to tell us about Albert?
Well, Albert was a man of many factions. He was an artist, he was a singer, he was in theater. After the war, it's not listed here, but he had two theaters in New York, the Cherry Lane Theater and the Provincetown Theater. He got a Master of Fine Arts in theater from Yale. He's authored art books, he traveled 17 countries. He was a giant in his field of art and art education. And when he retired from being the head of the Fine Arts Department in Newton, he came back to the Maryland Institute of Art and set up a whole new program for them. And he had a wing named after him at the Maryland Institute of Art. So Al's quite a guy. He was the first one to teach art on television in the United States called Art Around Us in Miami. He was director of art education in Dade County. He was the first one to take art students to China, opened up China for art education. He's quite a guy.
Absolutely. What an amazing list of achievements. And this is the book that you talked about.
Yeah, Children in the Arts in the 10th, 14th edition, and teachers that have no art experience. So that gives them an overview of what to, how to approach teaching art. And it's a colorful book, all kinds of interesting experiences there.
Now here he is at Penn State. What is this?
This Penn State, every other year, Penn State gives most honored alumni award, and this particular that was given to Albert as the most honored alumni from Penn State. So obviously he's well thought of in many quarters.
His wife looks very happy.
Helen, yeah, she's a sweetheart. Helen was a student at Yale Drama School with Albert, and that's how they met.
Good story. Well, let's look at Will. Let's see where he did. He followed in your father's footsteps.
Yeah, Will became a jeweler and graduated University of Miami, married. After the war, my father opened up a store in Frederick, Maryland in 1948, and he was really very successful.
Look at all the things that he did with his business.
Yeah, the store is now over 100 years in business, and you'll see later on his son Jeffrey have continued the jewelry store. Willie was a very fine man, very gentle, very understanding, quiet, but thoughtful. Everybody loved Will.
Well, now here we go back to the first store. Here's a beautiful picture of it.
Yeah, this was first Columbia, then Colonial Jewelry. I remember it well. We sold musical instruments in back and guitar strings, and every Saturday an optometrist would come in from Baltimore and examine eyes and did a little bit of everything what they did in the olden days. This is the stores I remember growing up with, and long, narrow.
And that's your father in the picture, and who is the other? That's not your mother.
We always had a girl working somewhere. I don't know who this particular lady was.
Okay. So he had somebody else in the
Did
store.
have one lady through the years who stayed with us. We knew was named Naomi Myers, and her husband Stuart. They were musicians, country western music. And,
Really interesting. Well, now this brings us up till today. So
Right,
100 years later.
100 years later, we're in Frederick, Maryland now. That's Jeffrey, Willie's son, and Patty, Patricia, his wife. that Patty and Jeff met at James Madison University in Virginia. They married, and they have three children. And Sarah is the heir apparent to the throne. She's got a very serious and lovely girl, and she's going to be the fourth generation.
Wow. In the same business.
Two young boys, they may be the fifth generation.
Wow. Now let's look at your career, Melvin. You also went into the jewelry business.
Yeah, I started out, I got a scholarship to St. John's College. At that time, it's called the 100 Great Crooks of the Western Civilization. But anyway, my father opened up a store in Annapolis. He always liked Annapolis. He taught me into going into the store. So he set me up in the store. It was 2 blocks from the Naval Academy and Maryland Avenue. But a woman came in one day and she said, Melvin, they had a jewelry store on Main Street. She said, we've lost our lease and we don't want to retire from the jewelry business. We find lines of silver, crystal, and china. And she said, I always dreamed of having that. And I wonder if you would sell your store. So, of course, I talked to my father and we sold the store. I went back to Westminster to be with him. But as a side to that, the Stearns who bought my store, if you remember the picture of little John Kennedy saluting when his father was passing by in the funeral, Kennedy's funeral in Washington, famous picture. Well, their son is a man who took that picture. That's
for heaven's sake.
That's who bought my store, and it went to Westminster.
Interesting. And you ran that until...
Or then someone came in and wanted to buy that store. So I sold that store, and Willie said, sell it and come on up with me. So that's what I did. And I stayed with Will for 30 years. Never had a crossword.
Wow. Well, let's look at when you finally did retire.
Did retire, the love of my life, Betty. Betty worked for Juvenile Services, the Frederick Girl Juvenile Services for many years. She retired, and we moved to Florida. We were there 38 years, and the last 8 years she developed Alzheimer's and went to a retirement community, and then Betty passed on, and they brought me back to Frederick.
And I have a lovely picture here to show you in the Frederick store.
Hey, there I am.
So 30 years after retirement, you came back to work.
Lovely picture and an article in the Frederick News Post paper.
That's a great photo, and it shows what a classy store it is, too. Now let's look at Gerald's career. Where did he go after the war?
Jerry got a bachelor's degree and then master's and a doctor of philosophy at Johns Hopkins University. And he was head of the philosophy department at Lincoln University in Oxford, Pennsylvania. He was there for 27 years. He retired from there.
So Jerry became an academic. And there is the book that he edited.
Yeah, Jerry was chosen by his peers to edit this book of Dr. Hammond, who's considered one of the greats in the world of philosophy.
There he is with his wife, Joy.
Joy is Jerry's third wife. He met Joy at a high school reunion at Park School. They went to high school at Park together. They went to reunion and they hooked up and very happy together.
I'm delighted that you found this tribute. Let me read this. It says, about Jerry, he spent his life pondering the meaning of truth and morality and trying to be a good man. He made us all think, often about things we didn't want to think about. Inevitably, that process helped many of us form our own moral codes, ideas, and come to grips with the challenges of the human condition. This was his gift to the world. Perhaps we did not agree with him, but he was a true philosopher and never stopped asking the deeper questions and playing chess until his dying day. That's lovely.
Great chess player. He's president of many chess clubs.
Love it. Now, this I think is fascinating. We found the photograph of your parents' tombstones. Your mother died in 63 and your father 3 years later. And there's a tribute that Jerry wrote that is to each of them, your mother on the front, your father on the back side. And I'd like to read those if you don't mind. Even more than stone or blood and bone, she remains what she was, a mother among sons, and a son, S-U-N, among mothers. What a lovely, lovely thought. And to your father, who died 3 years later, he said, shimmering memory, give up your ghost to bear its message on this slab of time. This man was sweetly balanced. Turbulence, and some who knew him felt he was sublime. Wow, Jerry had a way with words.
Sure did. He wrote wonderful short stories too.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And we have the names here, but they're not sitting in the order in which they're pictured, or the way the titles are listed.
From left to right, we have Jerry, Will, myself, and Albert. Left to right on the top is Marilyn, who's Will's wife, Betty, who's my wife, Joy, who's Jerry's wife, and Helen above Albert, who's his wife.
Very nice. That's a very happy picture.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, it summarizes what we've been talking about. 4 brothers went to war. They all gave service to their country. They all had outstanding careers, and they deserved a very happy life.
Can I say something? There are many children and many grandchildren, and many of the children have exceeded the expectation in their fields of art and entertainment, and it continues.
Well, that's fabulous, because we now have this picture of your family reunions, which is amazing to me that you would do this. Tell me what the term herstock refers to.
The family was very talented musically, all the young kids and everything. And we decided to all get together and everybody would play their instruments and so forth. So we plagiarized Woodstock into herstock. Every other year for 4 years, we'd get on Jeff and Patty's farm out in Wolfville, Maryland, set up a stage and sound equipment and sing songs and play music and just have a wonderful time. And you can see we had hard-shelled crabs, roasted ears, and fresh peaches and all the wonderful summertime foods that Maryland brings to you. That's me on top there with Patty, and I'm singing an old British musical song, Don't Forget Your First Sweetheart is Always in Love with You, no matter what you do. And of course, your first sweetheart is your mother. I put all the children together with the mothers, and we sang a song, and they brought tears to their eyes. And that's what we did at Herstock. We bonded together as a family. But then as children grew older, began to spread apart, and Herstock was no more.
But I think it typifies the kind of story that you've had all the way through. The 4 boys and your parents were very close growing up in Westminster. You stayed close despite the fact that you were in different branches of the military, and you kept getting together whenever you could find a way to do so. I think it's a beautiful story of a very close family and a remarkable story of surviving the war and going on to have very successful careers. So my thanks to you, Melvin, for organizing all of the photographs and the stories to put this together. I think it's a tribute to you and to your family that you are willing to share this. So thank you very much.
Well, I thank you, Antigone, because without you, nothing would be possible. Hope this makes the Carroll County Historical Society one happy bunch.
I do too. Thank you, Melvin.
Thank you, Antigone.